This is the blue charm, and it's the hair wing version that we've selected for this second fly in the series of silver award flies. And Gretchen, if you'll go over the recipe for me, I'll just kind of show some of the materials that we're going to be using.
Okay, first you need a hook, and like a TMCO 7989 or any standard salmon hook will be fine. For the thread, we use black thread. The tip is fine silver oval tinsel. For the rib, you want small silver oval tinsel, slightly larger than the stuff that you used for the tip.
Yeah, and I'm using Lagarten in both cases here, Gretch.
Okay. And then for the tail, we want golden pheasant crest.
And there's one of those guys right there. I removed it from the cape already.
Okay. And then for the tag, we want yellow silk or rayon floss.
Okay, we got that. We've got a little spool of that.
Okay. And for the body, we want black silk or rayon floss.
And we've got a spool of that as well.
Now we move to the hackle, which is blue hackle, which is like the kingfisher blue is what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's what we got here. So actually, it's from a whiting hen cape.
And then for the wing, we're going to use some gray squirrel tail.
As we have right here.
And that should complete our fly there.
Before we move into the actual tying steps, let me take a minute to prepare some materials. I'm just going to put a couple of turns of thread on this hook. They're going to be used to anchor the feather here in just a minute. But while I'm getting ready to grab a couple of materials, my tinsel and the feather, Gretchen will cover a couple of main points that need to be covered regarding proportions on this fly, which are pretty important.
Yeah, these proportions will be things that will be used, obviously, in the evaluation of the fly. So you need to really pay attention to these. The tip should start at a position on the shank directly above the halfway position between the hook point and the barb point. The tail should extend up to about a half a gap behind the bend. The tail should begin at a position where the shank starts to drop off, and that's like where the bend begins. And the intent there is for the tail to hug the bottom of the wing, so you don't want to tie it on where it's starting to bend or you can't get it to hug the bottom of that wing. The throat hackle should be tied on as a collar, and then you pull it down to make a throat. And those fibers of the collar should slope back towards the hook point, as you see in the picture here.
Before you go on, Gretchen, just on camera, I stripped off some of the metal tinsel over the coating so we can do the tag here in just a minute.
Okay.
Or the tip of the tag, excuse me. Go ahead.
Well, then we just have one more thing that you need to pay attention. Remember that when you put on a rib, there should be 5 turns, and you begin those turns at the bottom of the shank underneath, and then you end underneath also. And those turns of rib should be equal in distance between each one of them.
What I'm doing here is I'm going to prepare this feather and fold it, and I know probably many of you use the technique where you kind of stroke the fibers down and hold the feather in your hand, and I've never been real good at doing that, and now that arthritis is starting to bug my fingers a little bit, I find the technique I'm going to share with you to work a lot better. And what I do is I just take the edge of my scissors and fold the fibers back along that stem, stroking them back just like that. And then I'll do the near side of the feather as well. Now that broke, and that was not the plan. But I think I can still probably salvage that. And we'll use that because it was just the tip that I was going to cut off and throw away anyway, so I'm going to re-anchor that. And we'll try folding that again. And there we go. That's getting back at the angle that we're looking to maintain there. Right. Okay, now I'm going to set this aside. And I'll just grab a hackle pliers because I'm going to need them and it'll be easier to find later. And that's all ready to go. And we'll move into the steps. On step 1, I'm going to start the thread base just behind the loop back section of the hook eye. And Gretchen, what do we do from there?
Well, you want to lay a flat thread base to the rear, ending just in front of the position above the hook point.
Let's talk about that position in front of the hook point for a moment. It's really kind of important because it's one of the measurements that Gretchen talked about. They don't talk about it too much in the number 1 step, but it's really kind of important because in the number 3 step that we're going to get to here in a few minutes, we need to have a distance between where that thread ends and the start of the point of the hook. And you'll notice there's a difference there in the space between the two. And that should be equal to the width of the hook eye. And that will be critical to the placement of the floss in the tag portion of the fly. Now I'm just going to get ready to tie on the tinsel. And notice that I just anchored the thread core, and where the tinsel is going to start, the tag is going to start, the tip of the tag is going to start, is a position directly above the middle section of the point of the barb and the point of the hook, which is right there. It's going to start right there on the hook point where my bodkin is pointing right at the moment. So it's kind of important that we make sure that the metal covered part of the tinsel is slightly shorter than that distance so that we can capture it with a turn or 2 of thread. And that looks pretty good right there. So I'm going to wrap back there, capturing all of that until I get to there, and I'm going to capture just a little bit of that tinsel. Now I want my thread out of the way, so I'm just going to bring it forward temporarily here while I wrap the tip of the tag. And this can be kind of critical, and I'm going to take my time doing that, and I'm going to check each turn on the camera because I found that I can see on the camera a heck of a lot better than I can see just sitting here with my naked eyes sitting behind the vise and understanding that I have a little bit of distance between me and the hook. Now I'm going to put 3 turns on there. The directions call for 3 or 4 turns. And I'm going to tie that off on the bottom of the hook.
Remember, when you're tying off on this kind of a fly, you only want to use 1 or 2 turns of the thread so we're not building up a lot of bulk.
Very good point, Gretchen. Now let me trim off the waist here. And we're trimming it off extra long, as you can see, because just like we did on the top of the hook there when we attached the tinsel, we're going to remove the outside with our tweezers so that we can reduce bulk as we tie down this tip of the tag. And it's kind of a futzy process to do, but we're just going to keep right on doing it here.
Now, are you going to leave all that on, or are you going to trim that off to about 1/4 of an inch, or what is your plan there?
This right here, I just wanted it to come up about even to there. I did cut it a little bit long. I could have made it a lot shorter, but the main thing is that we're going to get rid of the outside of the tinsel there, so that when we anchor it down there, we're getting her cut off short. Let's see what that looks like. Let me see if I can anchor that in place pretty good now. So come forward with tight, closely spaced turns. I want to keep this as smooth as possible, because if I don't have a smooth underbody, the tag is going to be rough, and of course that's going to be a demerit in what our evaluators are looking for. That looks pretty good so far. Let me get that up to here. Yeah, that's looking better. Now, is that hanging at the, we got to come forward just a little bit, because that's got to be hanging at a position going into the step 3, I think you'll find it, that has a distance here equal to the hook eye. And that's looking pretty good. Let me grab my burnisher just to make sure that that's all nice and smooth. And this is what I'm using for a burnisher. The side of a half-hitch tool works pretty good and a whole lot of things, but this is just a burnisher that I use for this particular function. It seems to work pretty good for me. Now I'm going to go find some yellow floss, and I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we're ready to move into the floss portion of the tag. And what do we do there, Gretchen? We tie it on the top or the bottom?
Tie the floss tag material on the bottom of the shank,
Okay,
slightly to the off side of the bottom.
let me tilt it a little bit so we can do that a little easier. And it's still, thread torque is kind of pulling it over, so I'm going to pull that down so that it's on the underside. Now I go all the way, wrap it.
You wrap it down the shank in flat, touching each turn to the tip tie down position.
But I don't wrap the black thread all the way to the back. I wrap the floss back and then back over itself. I'm pretty sure that's what I do. I'll just have that anchored on the bottom here. Okay. Get that nicely placed. And I think when I come back...
You go to the tip tie down position and then you go back.
Okay, got it. All right. That's what I'm doing here now.
To the tie off position.
I need to overlap slightly so I get I kind of shape the floss section there. Okay, now let me back up. I put some extra turns in there that I don't really need. Okay, I'll do that.
And then you tie it off on the bottom.
On the bottom? Okay, that's what I was wondering about. And
then you want to trim it and leave about 1/4 of an inch of waste.
Okay, I should have trimmed the waist from the tinsel before, or cut it a little bit shorter, and I probably should have cut it shorter. So I'll do it all right now so I can catch up with the instructions. Let me trim off this waist right here. Again, leaving just a small portion. And I'll place another couple turns of thread just to make sure that I don't bump it here while I'm working on it.
Now you want to burnish that.
Oh, yeah, good, thank you. Let me get that burnisher out here. And we'll kind of polish that up a little bit.
That just helps remove any irregularities that might be there. Smoothing out a
Take a
bit.
quick look on camera and see what that looks like. That looks fairly good. There is one spot that's not great, but it's okay. It's tough to see when you're wrapping it with the lights shining in and everything, but maybe I can smooth that up just a tiny bit. Yeah, that smooths it out quite a bit. But that one bad spot that wasn't really great is right back about there, just in case you're noticing it on screen. Okay, a tail is the next thing, and let me get this out of my clothespin. And I need to cut the fuzzy fibers off the base end here.
You leave those stubs there, and it helps the stem from rotating as you tie it onto the shank.
Okay, what kind of dimensions do I use with
now
this thing?
Now you want to tie it, the tip of the tail should be located approximately 1/2 gap behind the bend of the hook and should curve upwards to a position above a gap or 1.5 gaps above the shank.
Okay.
And then you tie the tail feather onto the shank so it lies in the plane of the hook, and bind the stem down using flat thread wraps.
Okay.
How does that look? Are you happy with that?
That looks pretty good. It's about you said a gap behind or 1/2 a gap behind?
It says a gap or a gap and a half.
Behind.
Oh, behind.
Make sure we get that. And I think I got it sticking a little too far.
1/2 a gap behind the
Yeah,
bend of the hook.
Okay, so there's that looks about right there. Okay, good. Now what do we do?
Now we need to prepare the ribbing material.
Okay.
And you probably need to trim the stem.
Do we trim the stem? Or does it get bound into the... Anyway, I'll get the a rib material and we'll work on that here, and then we'll decide what to do with the waist end of the tail. We
Okay.
wanted... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gretch.
Well, I was just going to say, again, you want to, in order to minimize the bumps in the body, you want to tie that ribbing on the bottom slightly to the off side.
There we go. We'll just do that right now. Now, it's coming up on the side near me just because thread torque positions it there, so I'm going to pull it back down underneath and change its mind for it.
And you want to catch a little bit of the metal ribbing sheath.
Oops, I missed that. Then let me go back and
About
get
2
that.
turns before you reach the tail tie-in position.
Okay, there we go. Now, let's make sure that that's...
Now what happens then is when you wrap that ribbing, it'll pull forward to directly under the hook shank when you make that first wrap.
Let's get this slightly to that offside then. Now I just messed it up. Let me do it over
But
here.
we just leave it. We're not going to wrap it because remember we have to do the body
Yeah,
first.
right. It's but I need to get that attached, and I kind of messed it all up. Let me put it back into place. There we go. That's where I want it. Now another thing that we had a little problem with is identifying just where to trim off the waist from the tail. And it didn't really say, it just says bind it to the top of the hook. Well, what I like to do is trim it so that you don't have any of this really heavy part of the stem ending up in your body, because it's going to make your body kind of bulky and out of shape. So what I'm going to do is cut this so that's gone, and at the same time it's going to end right pretty close to the area behind the loop back portion. Now I think I had...
And you tie forward, and remember to use flat wraps.
Yeah, let me take and give it a twist every now and then just to get those wraps flat.
And that's going to help that black floss material when you be smooth. You could use a burnishing tool if you want to smooth out that.
Yeah, I think I'll do that too when I get to the front.
Okay.
The putting on this number of thread turns, it has a tendency to get twisted. All right, that's coming up quite a bit better. Pulling down, whoops. Take a little bit of saliva on my finger and pull that forward so that we can catch it with the thread and continue forward with the thread. And we want to get forward to, let's back up just a little bit and trim off the waist from the tinsel. And then we'll continue wrapping forward until we reach the front of the thread application, which is also pretty close to the back part of the loop back eye. So we'll leave that there for the moment. Okay, go ahead. All right, I've got the floss Gretchen now. Does that attach on the bottom or the top?
On the bottom.
All right, go. Let me tilt the vise just a little bit so I can get to that bottom part just a little easier.
And remember that tie down position is right there at the...
Right back at the loop.
Tip,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, let me... Now I just anchor that and then I wrap both to the back and to the front, right?
Yeah, just like you did before, you wrap it down the shank, keeping the fibers as flat as possible, using touching turns. And then you wrap the body material forward using slightly overlapping turns.
Okay.
And that's going to create, you want to create a slightly tapered body.
Another thing I want you to notice as I come over, the tendency of your multi-stranded fibers is to come apart. So you notice that I'm giving it a little nudge as I wrap it over. That's just to keep it from coming too far apart and causing a real mess as it spreads out over the hook shank.
Now, depending on how that turns out, you can decide whether you feel you need to burnish that or not.
It'll need to be burnished. I can tell that just by looking at it right now. It needs to be smoothed up just a little bit. Okay, that's coming into place pretty good here. Now we're going to start coming forward.
This part really takes some patience.
Allowing them to overlap slightly so we build up just a slight cigar shape. Now, do I tie off on the bottom or the top there, Gretchen? I don't remember.
On the bottom.
Okay, the
Tied
bottom.
off on the bottom of the hook shank, and
Okay,
with just a couple of turns.
Now, trim. I got a couple of fibers that came loose from the floss. Now let me get my burnisher, and I'm going to support that hook slightly with my thumb from underneath as I burnish across the top from kind of both angles. Now, you notice the little knob there on the end. It kind of makes it easy to reach down and around. Now I'm going to hold on top while I burnish the bottom and the sides.
Okay. As you notice, he hasn't trimmed off that material. We're going to do that a little later. So first we're going to wrap those 5 wraps of the rib.
Try to space those just as even as possible, and that's something your evaluator is going to really look at. So we want to get them just as evenly spaced as possible. There's 3. I'm going to have to back up because I'm going to not quite do it here, just like that. Get that one pretty close. And now we're on a 3rd one.
Be sure you leave enough room there at the front to tie in your hackle without covering up your wraps. That's
okay, good.
a mistake that I tend to make, and I have to really think about that. I'll have it just perfect, and then I'll tie on my hackle, and I've covered up my last rib wrap.
I'm just going to anchor
just a couple turns.
Now I got to strip away the...
Yeah.
All right, let me first trim off some of the tinsel because it's going to be just a little too much to strip away, and let me just start stripping away to the core. And we'll use the tweezers to get some of that. Nice floss getting in my way a little bit, so I'll just kind of wet my fingers with a little bit of saliva, and that'll just pull that out of the way. And
once he gets that off, he's going to make several turns to cover that up. And then, so he binds down the core fibers, and then he's going to trim all the waist at the same time now.
all right, what I want you to notice is I'm taking my left trigger finger and pushing the thread out of the way so that when I make my trim of the waste materials, the thread doesn't end up getting caught and ending up on the floor. Okay, it's time to put on the hackle. Let me retrieve that hackle that I've already pre-folded, and do I tie that on the underside or the top?
Yeah, you want to tie that on the underside, and then if your thread torque pulls it more to the side or whatever, you can take the tip and just pull it back under.
I'm going to pull it back under here. Now remember, I broke the tip off when I was folding the hackle, but I'm going to still pull those waste fibers back, but I don't need to trim the tip.
Now remember, you want the hackle fibers, the length should allow them to almost touch the hook point or to be slightly shorter. You do not want it to go beyond that point.
Okay.
And then start wrapping it.
I think I'll put about 4 turns. It didn't say in the instructions just how many turns they want, but on my personal flies, I tend to like the hackle to be a little bit sparse, but I also want them to show up on camera, so I'm going to give it about 5 turns there like I just did, and now we'll go ahead and
tie it off.
Tie that off.
Okay, you can, after you get it tied off, you can trim the waist.
I'm going to trim the waist after I put a couple of turns in there to kind of pull everything back and bind in that waist end. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
All right. It didn't say
That's kind of what we do on most of our flies.
Yeah, let me get rid of that waist. Now we have a collar, and what we want to do at this point is that once we need to pull it down into a beard formation. So I'm just going to take my thumb and push down on that so that I can kind of get those fibers pushed to the side and then pinch them in place. And let me pull that over there and pinch those in place. All right, it's time for the wing now. I've already taken a clump of my squirrel, cut it off, cleaned it, put it in the stacker, and I'll finish stacking it right now. And didn't want to spend time doing that. It was just easier to do it off camera. Now I'm going to hold on to this clump of fibers and get rid of some of the short waist ones there. They just pull right out. Notice that I'm holding in my right hand right out towards the end of the clump of fibers and getting rid of all those short guys, because they're going to come out anyway and just be a frustration when you try to tie them on the hook. Now we're going to measure our wing for length. Now where is that supposed to go, Gretch?
Back to the tip of the tail, where that tail kind of tips up, right back to there.
Okay, so I'm going to measure that for length, just like that. Reach in with my left hand, and I want to cut it off and then glue it before I tie it on. That's what they say in the instructions.
Pre-glue that.
And I have some...
That way you don't have to trim it after you have it mounted.
I know that this is a conspiracy. Jim Ferguson is the fellow that wrote the instructions, and he just wants me to accidentally crazy glue my fingers to the hook right here while we're running the camera. I know that's what's going on here.
Position those at the tie down position, make the soft loop around and pull it down.
And those are a little short. Slip forward a little bit on me.
Oh.
And I'll undo them, because one thing about the glue, if it hasn't totally set up, we'll be fine.
Oh, so what happened is you tied it a little further forward than you intended, so you
Correct.
just slipped it back so the length is appropriate. Yeah, be sure you watch that. That is easy to happen.
And that can get you a mistake on your... There we go. I knew that I just about would... Okay, that's set up good now. And I'll go ahead and build the thread head.
And after we get that thread head done, we're going to coat it with several coats of head cement so that it looks nice and shiny and pretty. That's part of what you want to do with a steelhead or salmon fly.
All right, I'll grab my whip finish tool right now and
one of the things you want to do to be sure it's consistent, when you do that beard and when you do the wing, you want to make sure that your volume of material is the same from fly to fly so that it looks consistent.
Okay,
you want to evaluate that fly?
well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Gretchen, is I'm going to go off camera for a minute and put on a couple coats of glue, because watching glue dry on screen isn't going to do us any good. So I'm just going to turn off the camera for a minute and get a couple of coats of glue on that head.
Okay. Let's go through it one by one like we did before.
Well, okay, the evaluation is time to do that now. And you'll notice also that we've added a couple of layers of glue to the head, so it's done.
Okay, well, you want to take a look at the overall appearance of that fly first?
Right, there's the overall appearance and consistency are the two things that your evaluator is going to look for, and whether the proportions were followed. And let's go over those proportions again. What did it say there?
Okay, the tip should start at a position on the shank directly above the halfway.
Okay, the tip is this little turns of tinsel right here, and they go straight up from that halfway point between the point of the barb and the point of the hook. That's where that is, and that's where it'll go. It's there, so that meets that criteria. Now the next thing should be the tag.
Oh, the tail is next.
Oh, the tail.
The tail should extend to about 1/2 the gap behind the bend.
And it looks to me like it's about 1/2 a gap behind the bend. So that one's good.
And it should start right at the drop-off point as it goes into the bend.
Which would be right here. Okay, good.
Then, I guess it doesn't talk about the tip at all here. We should maybe...
Well, anyway, the tip was explained in the instructions that it is started 1 hook eye width forward of the hook point. Well, you can see it. In other words, it's a little bit forward of the hook point. We'll just leave it at that. and the tip is this yellow portion.
Okay. Okay, now let's talk about the throat.
Okay, the throat of the hackle fibers that they should reach the point of the hook or be slightly shorter. And then on these it reaches the point of the hook and it just barely touches the point of the hook.
Okay, and now let's take a look at the rib. What are you happy with that
The rib is a 5-turn rib, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 4, 5, and it's right here. The one is kind of hidden back here under the hackle and the wing, but it's there and it's the 5th turn. I think it's evenly spaced. It looks good to me.
And the wing,
The wing is just about right. Proportions might be a little bit heavy, and the wing is just slightly short. I think it could be just a 1/16 of an inch longer. It's not. I would probably mark that wing down. If all your wings were the same length, you'd get an okay on the consistency part, but the length part would not be correct. I think it should be just a little bit longer, closer to the tip of the tail.
okay. And how's our head? We got a nice smooth.
The head is smooth. It's fine for a hair wing fly.
Okay.
Anything else to do there?
I think that's about it.
That's what we'd be looking for. Okay. Good luck with you. Good luck with you all tying this fly. It's a fun pattern and it's really a good one on the stream.